Hello, my name is Wayne Pomerleau, and I'm a professor in the philosophy department of Gonzaga's College of Arts and Sciences. Having volunteered to do this, I'm part of this series of 12.5-minute lectures in recognition of Gonzaga's 125th anniversary celebration. The title of my mini lecture is The Valuable Legacy of the Enlightenment. The outline that you've been given allows you to follow where I am in each of the 11 tiny portions of this 12.5-minute lecture, and I thank you for being here. Introduction. The Age of Enlightenment was an 18th century intellectual and cultural movement in Europe and America whose values gradually became established and changed our world. Not only was our country created by Enlightenment thinkers, but American Jesuit higher education originated during the 18th century period of the Enlightenment with the founding of my alma mater, Georgetown University, in 1789, the very year in which the American Constitution took effect and in which our Congress passed the Bill of Rights. This little presentation will focus on 9 Enlightenment values: reason, experience, science, nature, liberty, equality, education, progress, and happiness. Values which significantly motivate both our private choices and our public policies today. While the values did not themselves originate in the 18th century, the 9 collectively distinguish modern times from pre-modern times, which were committed to monarchy, aristocracy, class separation, gender subordination, ecclesiastical control, and slavery, all various forms of submission to external authority. It should be obvious by the way I frame that contrast that I favor and advocate these 9 values. Number 1, reason. Some scholars refer to this period as the Age of Reason, and certainly a commitment to using reason as a primary instrument for making decisions is central to this period. In 1784, the great German philosopher Immanuel Kant published a little 8-page manifesto called What is Enlightenment? He says that enlightenment is our emergence from the inability and or unwillingness independently to think for ourselves. He considers the motto of the Enlightenment to be, dare to use your own reason. In response, we may wonder, as opposed to what? As opposed to letting others do our thinking for us. What others, for example? Our parents, our siblings, our friends and peers, our teachers, Big Brother the government, Holy Mother the church, and so forth. There is something safe, comfortable, and seductive about letting others do our thinking for us. But as long as we succumb to this temptation, we remain immature and irresponsible. Kant claimed that in his day, the process of enlightenment was going forward, but had not been finished. I would say the same is true in our 21st century American society. Reason remains a most effective alternative, and therefore most valuable as an alternative to fanaticism and violence. Number 2, experience. In order to have useful material for reasoning, we must be able to have and process our own experience firsthand. This, of course, requires a certain measure of freedom. If what I am allowed to do is severely dictated by others, individually or socially, then the experience on which I base my thinking will be narrow and constricted, leading to my thinking being impoverished. This is particularly true of that form of experience that is interpersonal communication. This is why two of the greatest political documents of the Enlightenment, the American Constitutional Bill of Rights and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, both guarantee freedom of expression. Limiting my experience of discussing ideas with other people inevitably cripples my capacity to use my reason. Number 3, science. Closely connected to reason and experience is science, which is systematic knowledge drawn from experience through the use of rational principles. It is perhaps significant that one of the greatest precursors of the Enlightenment was the renowned British physicist Sir Isaac Newton. It is no accident that in the 3 centuries since the dawn of the Enlightenment, modern science, with its younger sister, technology, have radically changed our world for the better and for the worse. Means of communication, transportation, agriculture, heating and cooling, and health care have all coexisted with the development of weapons of mass destruction and levels of pollution threatening to poison our planet. Still, short of a cataclysm, there is no turning back the clock of scientific and technological progress. Number 4, nature. The progress of modern science solidified the potentially disturbing conclusion that far from being separate from the world of nature, we humans are part of it. This conviction became ineradicably established with the acceptance of natural selection as Charles Darwin's mechanism for scientifically explaining the evolution of humans from other species, which we often consider inferior to us. There has been significant resistance to this acceptance by those who cannot bear to think that our differences from non-human animals are qualitative ones of kind rather than merely quantitative ones of degree. But again, there seems to be no unringing of that bell. However begrudgingly, we are gradually coming to acknowledge that we are part of the natural order and not separate from it. This may be a bitter lesson in humility, but it is a product of Enlightenment thought. Even though the greatest thinkers of this period tend to be distinctly anthropocentric, even compared to the Romantics of the following century, this regard for nature would gradually, over time, lead to environmentalism. Number 5, liberty. If there is a single central value of the Enlightenment, I think it is that of liberty, to which we've already referred. The two great political revolutions of the 18th century were both motivated by ideals of liberty. We are familiar with that part of American colonist Patrick Henry's speech of 1775 in which he cries out, "Give me liberty or give me death." Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence of 1776 famously refers to the unalienable rights of all people to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The preamble to the American Constitution calls for securing, quote, "the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity," close quotes. The slogan of the French Revolution of 1789 was, quote, "liberty, equality, and fraternity," close quotes. And the Declaration of the Rights of Man demanded, in the name of liberty, the freedom to do whatever causes no injury to anyone else. The movement from tyrannical to republican government was clearly underway, although it would be a long time arriving. Number 6, equality. The same can be said for equality. When Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence that, quote, "all men are created equal," close quotes, it did not seem that the phrase meant all humans. Jefferson himself, as we know, was a slave holder. The original Constitution counted a slave as 3/4 of a person for tax purposes. It was not until we had fought a bloody civil war that the 13th Amendment to the Constitution would abolish slavery and involuntary servitude throughout our country. The 14th Amendment later recognized former slaves as citizens, and the 15th recognized the right of all citizens to vote, regardless of race or previous servitude. All of this was in the 19th century rather than during the Age of Enlightenment. Women's equal right to vote would not be nationally recognized until early in the 20th century. Even after that, equal opportunity has been the goal of a long, continuous struggle. But the ideal of equality crystallizes during the Enlightenment. Number 7, education. We've already seen that the first Jesuit university in the United States, Georgetown, was founded during the 18th century Enlightenment. So were state universities, for example, in New Jersey, North Carolina, Vermont, and Georgia. So were such private universities as Yale, Columbia, Dartmouth, and Princeton. But beyond the mere spreading of educational institutions was the planting of the seed of a new pedagogy that would be slow to germinate, but would gradually educate students for independent thinking. Over 100 years ago, for example, the progressive model of American John Dewey would recognize that while propaganda tries to minimize surprises by obstructing change, true education, acknowledging change as a fact of life, celebrates the adventure of surprise. If education is to teach students to think for themselves, as I believe it should, they must be given not only the freedom to do so, but also the intellectual tools for doing so productively. Number 8, progress. From the perspective of Enlightenment thought, all that we have been considering thus far converges in a manner conducive to progress. Indeed, it seemed that all of human history was a progressive march from benighted to enlightened humanity. Kant maintained that human progress is constantly ongoing, although dependent on our freely chosen commitments. The French thinker Condorcet, who advocated recognizing the citizenship rights of women in 1790, by the way, thought that the progress of mankind in the past points to its predictability for the future. Mary Wollstonecraft, an English feminist of the 18th century Enlightenment, warned that the failure to educate women for responsible citizenship was a barrier to the continued progress of human virtue and knowledge. Throughout the 18th century, America embraced its progress from a set of backwater imperial colonies through rebellion against the greatest empire of that time to independence, the forming of new political institutions, and westward expansion. While not necessarily inevitable, human progress towards autonomy, dignity, and well-being was ongoing. Number 9, happiness. As we have seen, Jefferson's Declaration of Independence celebrates what he calls the pursuit of happiness as an inalienable human right. In 1789, the year of both our Congress passing the Bill of Rights and the French Revolution, Englishman Jeremy Bentham launched the hugely influential movement of utilitarianism. It advocated the greatest amount of happiness possible for the greatest possible number of people. While this ideal involves the danger of sacrificing the rights of a minority on the altar of the majority's happiness, surely human happiness is worth striving for. And classical utilitarians are admirable champions of universal rather than merely selfish or tribal satisfaction. Conclusion. By the end of the 18th century, the French Revolution had led to the Terror under Robespierre, the rise of Napoleon, and the beginning of the Napoleonic Wars, as well as to the start of the intellectual, artistic, and literary movement of Romanticism. But even if the Enlightenment dissipated as a cultural movement, the 9 values discussed here have lived on as its enduring legacy. Today, more than 200 years after the end of the Enlightenment, our very commitment to civilized society emphasizes these values of reason, experience, science, nature, liberty, equality, progress, and happiness. These values are ours, the enduring legacy of the 18th century Enlightenment. Thank you.
Make time for just one question, and then we'll need to transition the room.
Oh.
I'll let you sneak Dr. Pomerleau down for a coffee and cookie down the hall if you want to talk to him some more. So just one question.
I regret that there's only room for one. Plus, somebody asked quickly, maybe we can sneak a second one in. Yes, please.
I'll ask a question.
Please.
I'm not quite sure how to formulate this, so perhaps you can help me. But I recently was given the gift of a book called The Social Animal by David Brooks. Mm-hmm. And he talks about the fact that only a certain percentage of our brain really is rational, and that most of our decisions are made more on an emotional gut level. Right. And also to reflect popular culture, people like Stephen Colbert, who talks about truthiness, mm-hmm. and the fact that we choose we choose things that appear to be factual that fit in with the world vision that we would like to have. Right. So my question is, have we made any progress, or is this really the way we operate and we always will?
Well, yes, we've made progress in the sense that we are honing reason over generations as an increasingly effective tool. However, we also recognize today what people during the Enlightenment, for the most part, failed to recognize, namely the role that so-called emotional intelligence plays in our lives, as well as becoming increasingly sensitive to and admitting the role of bias in our lives. I think part of the contribution reason can make to our lives, and part of what we faculty members here at Gonzaga try to impart to our students, is the role of reason as a tool, not a tool to eliminate feelings or emotions. That, if not impossible, would at least be something that would not be appropriate to expunge from our human nature, but also the role of reason in providing us with a check on our biases. Not that we're ever going to be entirely free of bias. That also is probably an impossible ideal, if it's an ideal at all, but that we can learn to become aware of our own biases and to take them into consideration as we make the decisions we make in our lives. That's all I get. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. I had no clue, whether anybody would show up. I was told it didn't matter, that you're just talking to the camera anyways. But I appreciate you being here.